Hello and welcome to NAHRO's Managing During the COVID-19, a Funding, Flexibility, and Fulfilling Our Mission discussion webinar today. Before we get too far in, I do want to make sure we address any technical issues just to make sure you guys are on the same page as we are. But I am George Urbano. I will be your moderator today. I'm NAHRO's Director of Policy and Program Development. If you are having a technical difficulty, please feel free to contact us at professionaldevelopment@nahro.org, professionaldevelopment@nahro.org, or you can give us a call at 202-289-3500, and 202-289-3500, and we'll be able to try to help you through most technical issues. If you are having difficulty logging out of the webinar and go to webinar and logging back in, will tend to fix most things. So if that might be the first thing to try if you're having difficulty hearing or seeing the slides and presentations today. We are going to take advantage of a couple of features in GoToWebinar. The chat questions feature. You might see a chat or questions box, line on the side in your toolbar. You can click on that, enter your questions and comments there. They'll go into a queue, and from time to time today, we will review those questions with our panelists. We also are going to, we have a couple handouts in the handout section. You see the handout, little arrow next to it, will drop down. There are 4 handouts there. They are HUD documents. They're the frequently asked questions, the latest round from April 22nd, and then the 3 PIH notices, 2020-05, which is the PIH waivers, 2020-07, the Public Housing Operating Fund eligible uses and allocations, and 2020-08, the HCV admin fee eligible use notice. So those are all there. You can click on each of those individually, and they'll download directly to your device. We also are recording this session today, and so we will be putting a recording of this session at the end after the session today, probably be up tomorrow. So with that, to introduce, to give us a brief welcome and introduce some of our panelists, let me turn things over to NAHRO CEO, Adrienne Todd.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you all with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the work that many of you are doing support the work of our housing authorities. So since March, when this all began, NAHRO has been very busy bringing to its membership just critical information that it needed to get about things happening at HUD, things happening up on the Hill, and also creating a peer-to-peer platform. So colleagues have an understanding and ability to just talk to each other about what everybody's doing during these very unprecedented times. And so we're thrilled to be able to continue that with this webinar today. Today's call is opened up to our members and our non-members. And so we're excited to be able to do that, particularly given some of the amazing guests that we have on the webinar today. If you are interested in participating in some of the future NAHRO webinars at a membership level and interested in figuring out how to become a NAHRO member, please feel free to reach out to the email ceo.nahro@members.nahro.org, ceo.nahro@nahro.org, and we're happy to chat with you. Before I turn this over to our fearless president, I did want to give a quick shout out to all of you who potentially have graduating seniors this year. I mean, there's so much that we're all going through as professionals, but I know that as parents and caretakers, it's an interesting time for all of our families. So if this is the week, the month that so many graduations happen, I want to thank you and thank your students and congratulate them. And one of the reasons I bring that up is NAHRO, in addition to its advocacy work and its training work, we also believe in the people work. And one of the partners that we've had doing that with us over the past year is our friends at LDG Development. The great folks at LDG have started a $1 million scholarship fund with NAHRO. And we were so excited that last year we were able to select our first cohort of folks who are going to be able to go to college through the support of LDG and in partnership with NAHRO. So thank you very much, LDG, for your partnership. It is valued and welcome, and we look forward to choosing another cohort this year with you. And now I would like to pivot to our wonderful fearless leader, Sunny Shah. Sunny has been really eager and making sure that as a NAHRO family, we are pushing hard to get you the information, the funding, and the flexibility that you need. And I'd now like to have President Shah share a couple of comments with us.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It looks like we have a great turnout for today's webinar, and I know that the information that's going to be presented is going to be incredibly beneficial, and we'll be able to utilize it going forward as we're working to run our agencies. Again, congratulations to your seniors, and don't forget about the scholarships as we're thinking about our seniors graduating, as well as the seniors that are in the families that we serve that are graduating, and let's work to get some of those scholarship applications turned in so that we can perhaps have LDG scholars right in our own communities. Today, it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce my friend and my partner in leadership of NAHRO, Ms. Patricia Wells. Patricia was sworn in as the Senior Vice President of NAHRO in San Antonio on October 11th of 2019, and we've been working together since, and actually even before that date, discussing NAHRO's future and how we can best help to serve you, our members. Patricia brings over 26 years of public administration and nonprofit executive management experience to a role as the Executive Director of Oakland Housing Authority. And prior to that, she had a lot of experience in leadership and service as well. She had served as the Associate Director of Habitat for Humanity International, the West Region, and Senior Policy Coordinator as a mayoral appointee with the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs in DC. We were all just thrilled and celebrated with her when she became the Executive Director in Oakland, and I know that she has a lot to share with you today. So with that, Patricia, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President, and it's indeed an honor to serve with you and the rest of the NAHRO leadership team. My other honor is today I get to introduce a gentleman who has been our leader and in his first year has had quite a year transitioning in that leadership role for the Housing and Urban Development Department nationally, and it culminates today with his giving us some sage wisdom. Assistant Secretary Hunter Kurtz has had a variety of roles in HUD, from Community Planning and Development Specialist to the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Secretary. He's worked in the White House on economic issues and also served as Deputy Director of Detroit's Department of Housing and Revitalization. Also a fellow Pennsylvanian, one of the amazing things that I want to describe is that when you are in our Assistant Secretary's space, he is welcoming, he listens, and he is engaging. And as a fellow houser, understands what it feels like to be on the ground and have your attention focused on what's best for our residents, support of our staff, and to make sure that we're providing really viable communities. Throughout this pandemic, he and his representatives at our field offices have reached out to make sure that we have all the information we need as housing authorities and to help us move forward with creative ways. And I believe that today we're going to get an opportunity to hear some of the work that they've done just recently in the last 2 weeks, and again, an invitation for us to utilize our partners at the local HUD offices. Assistant Secretary, I just want to personally thank you for your thoughtful, responsive, and engaging leadership. And sir, the NAHRO community welcomes you. Assistant Secretary.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for those very, very kind words. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today. And again, NAHRO, thank you, Adrienne, everyone, thank you for having me, Sunny and Patricia. Before we start, I just want to say, you know, if you've heard me speak before, I talk a lot about how, you know, the work we do is incredibly important, and just, you know, how impactful it is in people's lives. But I don't think there's ever been a time like today that our work has ever been more important than it is today. The work we do in providing affordable housing is crucial in these times, as we face this sort of international pandemic. And providing someone with a house is one of the easiest ways to combat this virus, the social distancing. And so I just thank you all for your hard work, everyone out there working public housing authorities and in the affordable housing industry. Thank you for all of your hard work and dedication. I know we're all doing it in difficult and awkward situations. I mean, I'm here in my house. I've got my wife down the hallway and working, and 2 children, in theory, working down in the living room on schoolwork. A little schoolhouse down there. So and some of us have been impacted in various ways by this virus through friends and family. So I want to thank you very much for your dedication and your hard work. So I just wanted to update you on some of the work that we've done in PIH and the work we're continuing to do in PIH as we respond to COVID. As you know, in March 27th, the president signed the CARES Act. And one of the things, it provided us with roughly $2.25 billion worth of funding for public and Indian housing. But one of the things it did, and one of the first things we did after that was signed, was it gave us broad waiver authority. And this was something that we have been lacking in the Office of Public and Indian Housing. Typically, we would need to do individual waivers for each individual public housing authority. So we're talking, thousands and thousands of waivers, 4,000 some waivers plus times every different thing we needed to waive. The administrative burden would have just been immense for you all and for us. So Congress gave us the ability to do this broad waiver authority, which we implemented on the 10th of April through our waiver notice. And I like to look at those sort of 3 buckets of waivers that we did. The first was we did away with the as much as possible person-to-person interaction. We stopped or waived the requirements for meetings. We waived the requirements for person-to-person interaction with income certifications. Just anything we could do to ensure that people didn't have to be in contact with each other. The second thing it did is we stopped the requirements as related to reporting and other things, delayed, postponed report dates, and other things that you needed to submit to us. That information is important and we need it, but it's not as important as you all on the public housing authorities that truly are on the front lines doing incredible work providing food and medicine and delivering food and medicine and other necessities to the residents living in these public housing authorities. So we waived all of those requirements. And then the third, and probably one of the more impactful of the 3 as a single waiver, and it gets its own bucket, is the HQS requirements. By waiving the requirements that inspector go out and check a unit before someone moves into it, this is allowing a lot more flexibility, for public housing authorities to house people, and also again stops this sort of person-to-person interaction. So that was a big push by us that we got out back on the 10th of April. Then around the 22nd, we put out a bunch of FAQs, which I think are attached here. And we are updating those as we go forward. And one thing I should mention, I failed to mention about the waiver notice, we realized that we missed things. We've never done anything like this before. We know we've missed things, and we will more than likely do another round of waivers here in the next few weeks, the next month or so. So we will pick up those things that we missed to the best of our ability and get it in that notice. So then we did FAQs over the last couple of weeks, which I think have been super helpful. We've got a lot of those from conversations we had with NAHRO and the other industry groups, as well as our webinars we've been doing on a fairly regular basis with public housing authorities. And then last week, we published both the admin fee implementation notice and the operating fund implementation notice. As you know, we received in the CARES Act $685 million for the operating fee and then $850 million for the admin fee. And then on Friday and today, we released the funding for, on Friday, it was the operating fund. All 685 million went out. And on today, we put the first third of the admin fee out, which is roughly $360 million. And I'll go back to the notices just to talk a little bit about what they did. The big two, so in the admin fee notice, we listed a number of eligible activities that are typically not eligible that can be used with that funding. And we were required to do this by the statute. And we will update it as we come up, or as people come in and suggest ideas that we haven't listed that we may that we think are appropriate. But these include things that we've included so far are things like transportation, delivery costs for food and medicine, other things directly related to COVID that we we thought were relevant. But again, if you have ideas, please contact your field office because if there's something you want to do, we can get it on that list to allow you to do it if we think it's appropriate. Then with the operating fee note or the operating fund notice, we had a lot more broader ability to sort of give the freedom for the public housing authorities how they wanted to use that funding. The statute wasn't as restrictive as it was for the admin fee. So basically, you need to tie it to one of three things, which is the preparing for, the dealing with currently, or the aftermath of COVID, and your preparations for that. As long as you can tie it to one of those three things, we will and document that. Will allow you to use the funds at as you see fit. So those that's sort of the two notices in a 2-minute description. So there's a little bit more to them to that. But the other thing that we are working on that we hope to have out in the next week or so is our mainstream notice. As you know, the CARES Act also provided us with a proportional increase in mainstream voucher funding. And if you received funding in either of the two mainstream NOVAs that went out in 2018 or 2019, you'll more than likely receive something in this round. So that notice we have to go out. It's about 436 different PHAs. And that should be, again, hopefully in roughly a week here that we'll have that out. Obviously, there's always a few, it's always a process to get things out. So over the last few weeks, we've done a little bit of work, and hopefully this is going to make it easier for you all to really, like I said earlier, to do the really important and vital work that you all are doing every day. And I thank you for that, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assistant Secretary, and I will echo both what Patricia and Sunny said. You have been a tremendous leader during a difficult time. You and your team done a great job getting the blanket waiver authorities out. We know that there's some perfecting to do, but kudos to you and your team. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Adrienne.
So let's jump into some of the questions. So one question that seems to be popping up over and over here is the time frame within which folks are allowed to look at expenses tied to CARES funds. So basically, will folks be able to use CARES funding for expenses that occurred that are COVID-19 related that happened prior to May 1st?
As the way the statute is currently written, the answer is no. So we are not. This is not something we can waive, and it's a statutory requirement. So unfortunately, I know some areas were impacted beforehand. As it stands right now, we don't have the ability to do anything but allow you to spend funds or reimburse yourself for things you spent on before or since May 1st.
Sure. Thank you for that. Another question that's popped in here is you mentioned that there may be another wave of waivers that HUD is looking to publish, that some things may have been skipped. The question is any sense of what topics those waivers may cover that might, so you can prevent housing authorities from sending in, submitting waiver requests?
I'm sorry, should they not send in waiver requests?
No, so the question is, can you give us broad areas or more narrow areas of the areas where you think HUD, PIH will publish additional waivers so that housing authorities may not have to send in their individual waiver requests now?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, unfortunately, I really can't get into the details on that. We've been accepting, we've received a couple letters from public housing authorities and other groups suggesting ideas. I'd be happy if you guys wanted to send us some ideas that you think we missed. You know, two reasons I can't get into it. I'm not really allowed to talk about those types of things publicly, and second of all, we have been so focused on trying to get these first tranches of funding now that we really haven't begun the conversation yet. And probably will, you know, in the next week or so about what that waiver novus would look like.
Thank you. Another question is, can the CARES money for the voucher program and the operating subsidy be used for normal expenses, or is it just the COVID-19 expenses?
I mean, I would, I don't think there's a whole lot that you're doing right now that can't in some way be tied back to COVID. So you know, yes, you can, but I would just, you know, document it in a way to ensure that that you're saying, you know, I used it on May 5th, 2020, and so therefore it was a COVID-related expenditure.
Right. There's a couple of general questions about if agencies are going to use some of the waiver authority locally, is there a requirement that they have a public notice and public hearings given the social distancing efforts we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, again, one of the things we did waive was the requirement for public hearings. For the time being, I mean, you are able to use it. I would encourage you to notify your residents in some fashion, whether on your website or something. But at this point, there's no requirement that you have to come out and do a public meeting or something like that.
Right. Additional question in regards to procurement. Because things have been happening so quickly, is there any particular guidance that PIH has provided to help housing authorities or procurement questions they may have?
We do have some FAQs about, on the procurement issues, but if there's a general consensus that that's not enough information, we'd be happy to provide more detailed information about procurement.
Great. So we should send our listeners to PIH's FAQ page for procurement information.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There are a handful that deal with that.
Great. Okay. Another question here is relating to capital funding. When will revised capital funding be available, or is this revised funding for modernization of COVID expenses?
When will it be available?
Yeah, let me read that again. When will revised capital funding be available, or is this revised funding for modernization for COVID expenses?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll keep moving.
All right.
Environmental reviews, are those going to be required for any use of the CARES funds?
Yeah, unfortunately, we cannot waive environmental requirements. So there is some guidance out there on how to do it as it relates to COVID, but we can't. That's not something that's waivable.
Great. And you mentioned, Mr. Assistant Secretary, that about 1/3 of the admin fee funding was sent out. Any thoughts you can share with us on when we can anticipate the additional funding to be released?
We want to sort of see how things play out over the next few months, but I think later this summer we would probably put another tranche, if not all the additional funding out on the street at that point.
Mm-hmm. A question about some use of money, and I know that your FAQs handle some of these. I would certainly ask many of our listeners to go to the NAHRO site and the PIH website as well. But here's a general one. If the housing authority has to relocate staff to another location so they can social distance, can they, is that expense covered under the CARES Act?
It would for the operating fund. I would have to check if that's a listed activity, the admin fee. But if not, I would encourage you to contact us because that seems like something that we would want you to take a look at.
Yeah,
or we would want to take a look at.
Yeah, I do know generally that there's an interest industry-wide to try to align some of the allowable expenses on the public housing operating subsidy side with the admin fee. So I share that with our listeners. We are working with folks to try to achieve that alignment because we do know that there's not a lot of clarity there. So a question about the internal workings of HUD. There are other offices inside of HUD that have also placed their waivers out. I'll call out CPD as being one of them. What's the coordination like inside of HUD across offices? I think there's a question and concern about the alignment between CPD and PIH.
Yeah, I think we realize that there are some issues that may not match perfectly, and those are things that we have a team that has begun to work on that, and hopefully we can include some clarifying language here in possibly the next waiver notice or in some other format.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Here's one on inspections. Our agency conducts annual inspections as opposed to biennial inspections. Can we have the owner certify that the owner has no reasonable basis to have knowledge that there's life-threatening conditions in the unit instead of doing inspection?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we were, the type of thing we were trying to waive in the HQS process, so that it doesn't require an inspector to go out there and interact with the landlord and the resident, because we don't want anyone to get sick. And so that's exactly what we're encouraging folks to do.
Sure.
But I would encourage you to, we're going to need to have some sort of follow-up inspection in the coming months when this is when the pandemic has subsided.
Great. A question that is now resident focused. HUD made available a flyer last week related to the eviction moratorium, just to provide a fly out there for tenants and residents who may be impacted. The question is, are housing authorities required to use that flyer, or are they able to shape it into a flyer that makes sense for their locality, but using the base information that's provided?
Yeah, there's no requirement that you use that flyer. That was just us trying to provide you with additional information and ease.
Great. So we're just going to take one or two more questions because I know the Assistant Secretary is busy trying to make sure we have other notices getting out. So let's see. Is board approval required to apply any of the waivers?
I don't think so, but I don't want to answer that one definitively. I can't recall. I'm sorry.
Okay. No worries. We'll get a response and we can both mutually put it on our website. And let's see, that's a PBRA question that we will certainly invite. But I guess there is a general question, particularly since we have so many of our housing authorities who ratted into PBRA. What guidance would you give them generally about information that is in the PIH notice that might be applicable to them, or do we want to refer them to multifamily?
Yeah, I'd have to refer them to multifamily. I mean, we are in constant communication with multifamily in an attempt to ensure that they're, I know in the past we have sometimes had our wires crossed, if you will, and we've tried to prevent that from happening, but I don't want to speak for them.
Great. So, Mr. Assistant Secretary, there are a number of questions on here about allowable use of the CARES Act. I know that at Friday's call, you suggested to PIH grantees, if there's a question they have, that they should certainly forward it to HUD to answer directly. Can you share that email address if you happen to have it one more time, so make sure our listeners know where to go to get a specific question answered? And we'll certainly share this list with you as well.
Yeah, you can, and I don't have it right in front of me, but if you give me 1 second, I can pull it up. I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries.
Is there another question you want to ask me?
Yeah, sure. As you're pulling that question up, let's see. Can the Assistant Secretary share any ideas on how the HAP money that was allocated under CARES will be accessible?
That is a great question that I don't know the answer to, because we are still trying to formulate how we'll do that. I think part of this is to sort of see how the response is, what type of shortfalls we may have, and then formulate a response. We wanted to be extra careful before we put that funding out there, to ensure that we were doing it right, and sort of see how everything that's taking place impacts HAP payments over the next few months. And the email address that you're looking for is pih-covid@hud.gov.
Great. pih-covid@hud.gov. Yeah. Wonderful.
I wasn't sure if it was a dash or a dot. I just want to make sure.
I know that's really important. Absolutely. And certainly what we will do is, again, there are a number of questions here that if you sent a question in that has not been answered at NAHRO, we will make sure to send it to the Assistant Secretary's team. But in addition to your taking it upon yourself to send that question and I know that they've been very diligent updating their FAQs on a regular basis, and you can access it at their website and certainly at NAHRO.org on our coronavirus page. And with that, I'd like to thank you, Hunter, for again your partnership and your diligence in getting this work done. Any final comments you'd like to make to our listeners today?
No, I just think generally, and thank you for all of your hard work and continued diligence. What we do is incredibly important, and like I said earlier, it's never been more important than today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary. And Georgie, I turn the webinar back to you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Secretary Kurtz. Lots of great information. With that, let's turn to our housing authorities, and let's turn our attention back to Patricia Wells, the Executive Director of the Oakland Housing Authority and NAHRO Senior Vice President. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgie. And as you put up the PowerPoint for me, I just want to give context. First of all, again, hello to everyone, and I hope everyone is charging through this time. To give context to what I'm about to share today, OHA has the honor of providing subsidy to about 22% of Oakland's renters. So that's about 16,000 households, 2,000 of which are 62 age or older. So we have a significant high-risk community. And about 50% of our children are school age. Half of those attend the Oakland Unified School District, and half of them attend charter schools. We are a staffing complement of 374 housers here in OHA, and that includes phenomenal high esteemed police department. Next slide, Georgie. When this situation hit, we immediately put together a COVID-19 incident command team, and it's based upon emergency operations procedures and the National Incident Management System. And so in doing so, we identified 6 core folks who would lead us on a day-to-day basis of responding to COVID, including a public information officer, our operations, our logistics team was focused on our staff, public safety led by our chief of police. Our planning officer was led by our phenomenal policy person, who made sure that we were nimble in responding to advocacy asks by NAHRO and putting in the right metrics and tracking as we made moves here in the Housing Authority to respond to the crisis. Our finance officer has made sure that we've been tracking not just our spending, but the impact today and potential impact to the future, including everything from our retirement benefits plan to the changes in rental response, how our landlords and our renters are responding as families lost income. And then, of course, because a lot of what we've been doing has relied upon technology, one of the officers is our director of IT. Our focus since March 16th, when Alameda County here in California went to shelter in place, has been on prevention, protection, being nimble to the needs of our staff, our residents, and the community, and making sure that we were able to continue starting day one with completing essential functions. Next slide, Georgie. One of the things our incident command team put together were decision points. And these points, I know it's a little bit difficult to see, but they help the supervisors and managers, and we're fielding it out to staff to know what to do if something occurs in their wellness. And so it basically says, I came to work, I feel fine, and now I don't. What should I do? Or I woke up this morning at home and don't feel fine. How should I proceed? That's complemented by a series of communications that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks to make sure that we're identifying the appropriate steps for both staff and residents. Next slide, Georgie. When it comes to our families, one of the things that hit home was that the school district here in our county shut down, and it looked like very early on that we were going to have a high number. As I said, 6,000 of our children have to get used to distance learning, and parents having to support that. And so our assistant secretary kind of gave a joke of what that feels like to be a parent trying to help their children in distance learning. And what hit us very quickly was the digital divide. And so we issued out some resources that are online, provided by city, nonprofit, and our county partners, so that parents knew how to work with the Oakland Unified School District to get help on their children's continued learning, as well as resources, everything from medical expenses, food, groceries, and information. You see a couple of photographs here. One of the things that our team initiated early on, because we have so many vulnerable seniors, is a hot meal distribution and grocery distribution starting week one, where we're serving over 400 of our seniors here in Oakland. And those who are not serving, we're just making sure that they're tied in either to family resources or community resources. You see here an example of some of the marketing and the presence that we tried to have to keep things positive, colorful, and forward-thinking. It's gone out in rent statements as well as postings in the lobbies of our community buildings. I should mention we have over 300 properties here in Oakland that we're responsible for, and so we're trying to make sure that we have a visual presence for wherever our seniors are going to. On day one, we did close down our lobbies, our community spaces, and our playgrounds, and so we had to think nimbly on how to get the communication out. That includes on our website for stakeholders, clients, the community, as well as our landlords, as well as the use of robocalls, text alerts, because we have a large percent of our tenant population that are logged into our text program, where we can text them everything as reminders to complete your census submission, reminders about how to work with EDD and unemployment when you have questions about losing your job, the community resources I talked about. Our police department sends out safety alerts on a routine basis, as well as alerts about activity that might have occurred within the community, and updates about how to do phone check-ins and how to make sure that if you're able, you can be part of the volunteer power. And so we've encouraged residents who are able to get out and volunteer so that we're doing peer and community support. Next slide, Georgie. Of equal paramount importance is how we've been communicating with our staff. And so here's an example of communications that we put together that go out weekly. And it includes information on everything about self-care, prevention, proper use of PPEs. where to go for help when you, as a staff person of OHA, are experiencing some of the same things as our family has. We actually had younger parents who had their own challenges with distance learning and preventive health care. So we wanted to make sure that we were plugging our staff in the same thoughtful ways that we were trying to plug our residents in. We've provided a lot of information on what the transition to working remotely is like, including an agreement as well as helpful hints on trying to be organized in that. We've centralized our personal protection equipment underneath our public safety team, and we're doing regular purchasing to make sure that we have enough, not just for our staff going into units, but also our staff that are inside the offices. One of the things that we've focused on clearly is making sure that we're 6 feet apart and social distancing. So we've turned a lot of community spaces and former conference rooms into work areas using our technical team and making sure that we have 6-foot barriers. So the dividers in the offices are 6 foot high. And we also have implemented a daily check-in, which is an online check-in that all of our employees can check into in the morning. And by 11 o'clock, we know whether you're working off-site, whether you're working on-site, whether you're remotely, or whether you're called in for the day. And that's just to help supervisors monitor so that we can be quick to respond to the needs of our staff people. Next slide, please, Georgie. Trying to truncate it down, I just want to say that this is a lot of what Oakland Housing Authority has done in the immediate. We've done what a lot of our colleagues on the phone have done. We're responding primarily to exigent health and safety and complaint inspections. We pre-call before going out into the field to make sure no one in the home is ill. And if they are, we reschedule. Our team has available PPE and face masks on, which are required for all the team members here in the Housing Authority and is now a requirement set by our county health officer. And we'll provide that to tenants and ask tenants to go into another room for those emergency inspections. We've continued throughout this time of doing vacant unit rehabs, and we are using creative methods to serve our Housing Choice voucher community. That includes video conferencing for voucher briefings, use of DocuSign for voucher issuance and request for tenancy approvals, using DocuSign and verification for repairs so that we can either talk a person through or the owner can upload videos, receipts, and photos of repairs to do validation. We have fillable online interim income forms through our business system and self-certification for loss of income also using DocuSign. We have done online briefings, and we're slowly transitioning to phone intake appointments for port-in applicants and looking at the use of video for doing those interactions so we can continue to serve our families. Again, our focus has been on prevention and protection, but we also know that we've got to be forward thinking. So we've put together a series of tracking matrices, both on the program side, the operational side, and the financing side. We have the same as we do the support for our staff. And as we think about what will the future look like as our governor here in California is looking at loosening some of the shelter-in-place order, we're looking at the playbook that banks and hospitals have used, limited persons inside public spaces, a lot more online appointments and interactions, building up outside seating for folks as they're waiting to be one of the persons called into offices, and of course the restrictions to workspaces. You know, if we've all gone through this, our assistant secretary said this is something we've never done before. And it's one of the first times that we can definitively stand proud and say, maybe not the first time, but it's a time when everybody realizes that housing is one of the lead importance in us trying to protect our community from this invisible disease and from this virus. And it's probably going to be our new normal. And so OHA here in California, and I should mention, one of the things we have is an amazing cohort of Bay Area EDs and California-wide EDs, our Pacific Southwest region, on making sure that we're engaged on a weekly basis and sharing best practices and giving each other support during this time. And so I would just close out by saying using what the Assistant Secretary and HUD has provided us in terms of funding, waivers, as tools so that we all now can be very nimble and start to create programs to take us into the future that are responsive and designed for our specific communities and our unique needs. This is the time, I think, where we're rising above, and I'm just very proud to be part of the community. And so thank you, Georgie.
Excellent. No, thank you, Patricia. Lots of great information. If you can just hang around, we'll have some questions after we turn over to David Gates, Executive Director of the Lonoke County Housing Authority. David, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. It's good to be on here with a lot of fellow housers. Like Georgie said, I'm Executive Director of Lonoke County Housing Authority in Arkansas. We've also got 5 other small PHAs that we manage and operate close to Central Arkansas. We have about 40 employees. Just to give you a little background of what we have under our umbrella. We have about 40 employees. We manage either units or Section 8 of about almost 1,500 doors or families, if you will. About 14 maintenance guys, 26 admin, and we serve about 5 counties. And so we have a wide footprint, if you will, in the state of Arkansas, and serve quite a different range of areas, coming from metropolitan area all the way to more rural Delta type situations. And that has really played an interesting role, and we've received some interesting data out of this pandemic because of the differences between the areas that we serve. So I thought I'd real quick run through just a brief timeline of how Arkansas, the state, Arkansas was one of the probably 6 or 7 states that actually was not under a shelter in place or work from home order. The governor did issue a number of executive orders, all which appear to have done a really good job. We've kept the state's numbers of cases really low, seems like. Arkansas is not as densely populated, of course, as Oakland, California, or any DC or anything like that. And so we have built-in social distancing to some degree, and so that's one of the perks of being in Arkansas, if you will. So, very early on, March 12th or so, I think the executive order from the governor came out, and so right then and there, we rolled out, our infectious disease policy and procedures. We initially started using a skeleton crew where we rotated schedules and did 2 or 3 employees per office per day, and we'd switch them around. However, after about 2 weeks of working with that, we realized that the efficiencies weren't there. The staff were concerned that they weren't able to complete their caseload or their workload during the 2 or 3 days that they were there. And the other days that they were at their house, they were doing telework, but it was not in the tenant files. It was not where they could do interims or annuals or stuff like that. They were reading policies or taking online trainings from NAHRO and stuff like that. And so shortly after that, we rolled out, I guess, stage 4, if you will, of our procedure plan, and that was a full-on telework package. And so all employees since April the 2nd have been working from home, obviously excluding the maintenance personnel. Maintenance obviously has handled emergency work orders and stuff like that, vacant work orders or vacant unit turnaround and stuff like that. So that's a brief rundown of the past timeline. Our current plan right now is to open our offices back up. At least we're hoping that at least the lobbies will be open to the public, and all staff will be back in place by June 1st. We're to our teams at this point, with the understanding that may change. The governor here in Arkansas has relaxed some of the executive orders and restraints that he's put on the state. He's relaxed some of those and opening things back up. And so we're gonna kind of stay back, still handle all the needs and services that we do provide from remotely. But we're gonna watch and see if the numbers change and just, in a sense, do our part to make sure that curve does stay down and that the disease or the virus does not continue to spread at such a high rate. So I had four or five main points, about how we've managed through the pandemic. Obviously, first and foremost, we quickly went to a telecommuting workforce, and so communication was very interesting. At the very get-go, everybody wanted to do webinars, Zooms, GoToMeetings. And those are great. However, we came to the point where it was like, simple text or an email is sufficient, and we don't need to see your face and use all the bandwidth and everything. And we felt like we were, almost overusing that form of communication, and so we ratcheted that back pretty quickly. We did provide cell phones for all program managers. So when we closed the offices, we provided cell phones to all program staff and had our phone lines forwarded to those cell phones. So when you called in, it was, press 1 for public housing, it would roll straight over or be able to call that cell phone. And so we had that option as well. One of the big things for us was trusting the technology that we had in place. Luckily we had already made a transition back in December and January to cloud-based computing, and so our servers were no longer in our buildings, and so we had already been set up to have RDPs on all of our computers, and so we were able to literally just unplug the computers and take them home. There was obviously a fear factor there when we started that process, because it was concerning that we were literally shutting down the offices, but yet trusting that everything was going to be up and running. There were a number of issues that we wanted to make sure that were covered. So it took us about a week to roll it out, but once it rolled out, we had about a week of questions and concerns. It did smooth out, and it smoothed out better than we initially thought it would. So everything did work out fairly well for us. I think one of the biggest fears, at least, I'm fairly new to the industry, and one of the big things that I've always noticed is everybody's comments about the tenant file. Oh, I've got to have the tenant file. And it was obviously a fear of a lot of our staff, and what we found and felt was you can still process everything you need by and large without touching that tenant file. And so we had to overcome that fear of what we've always done, and we had to accept that the new normal is not having your hands on that tenant file at all times. And so we've been performing the interims and annuals, without the tenant file. There are, of course, times that we have to go up there, and we do, but we coordinate that effort, through text or email, just make sure no one else is in the offices to minimize the risk of spreading anything from person to person. Currently, we're trying to roll out online applications. As a small PHA, we don't always have the resources that larger PHAs do, whether it's financial and honestly, financials to me is not always the big thing. It's more of human capital. The fact that large PHAs may have 300, 400 employees, and we may have 3 or 4 employees per agency, and so it's difficult. It is more difficult for small PHAs to roll things out at times because we just don't have the human capital to allocate those resources in a way that could roll things out quickly. And so we are trying to do online applications and online waiting list management. We have signed contracts on that already and should have that rolling out in the next month or two. One of the big things that we found that was super important as we started this process, obviously we watched the news just like anybody was, and we could see that there were going to be, significant amount of job loss, and so we were scared, of course, that our Section 8 funding would not be able to cover the financial impact of the interims and the increases and the HAP payments and stuff like that. And so we early on started watching the numbers. We actually have not been impacted quite as much as we thought by any means. In general, if you're a numbers type of person, in general, our HAP expenses have gone up about 3%. We expected it to be closer to 15 to 20%, but 3% was the overall impact. As far as rental payments were concerned, under the public housing program, we again thought that there would be quite a few residents that failed to pay or refused to pay or didn't pay or couldn't pay, and we were just over 1% that were not paying it specifically due to COVID. Of course, we had some that were not paying for other reasons, but specifically due to COVID was about just over 1%. So we found that interesting. Public housing did see a decrease of about 4%. So you had 3% on Section 8 and 4% on public housing. Interesting numbers. Earlier I mentioned that one of our areas, we actually have 2 of our agencies that are very close to a metropolitan area, and then the rest of our agencies, the other 4, are very rural areas or semi-rural. And so, you know, the interesting fact that came out of it, or interesting data that came out of it, was the income changes were very non-impactful or very small in the rural areas. And the only thing that we can think of is, you know, a couple factors. Either there's not enough jobs there prior to the pandemic to make a big enough difference whether they close down or not. We have a lot of SSI or SS clients on there. It could be that they are farming communities and they were not furloughed or laid off or anything like that. They continue to work. But then our metropolitan area did experience the greater amount of job loss. And so, you know, I mean, it's not groundbreaking stuff. It's fairly common sense, but it was interesting to actually see it played out in the numbers. As far as the waivers are concerned, our housing authorities, we adopted 2 of the waivers that were mentioned in the 2020-05 notice. Specifically, we adopted the community service waiver and also the interim inspection waiver. We felt that the other waivers, although good, they were not necessary for us to adopt at this point. We felt that the two that we did adopt were waivers that we needed to ensure that our staff was not coming into contact and jeopardizing the health and safety of either party. And so we did adopt those and let our residents and public know on those. We're continually monitoring, you know, our setup and our situations and determining if we need to adopt any of the additional waivers. But at this point, we actually really feel like we probably won't at this point, but we do appreciate that HUD actually had those out there and available for us. And you know, I think there's some additional waivers that we hope that might come out of this, and we'll see in time if they will. You know, as far as the, yeah, it looks like.
Sorry, David. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
I just want to, if I don't mind, just cutting in right here. I just want to get to a couple of questions just before we're at the top of the hour. I just want to give a couple of questions to you guys. So again, welcome back, Patricia. Just as we go through here, just can you both just give a couple sentences on how that contact with residents, how you're handling that situation when, you know, there's a lot of times the resident wants to be in-person pieces. How are you getting information? How are you verifying information? And how is that working for you? I don't know, Patricia, if you want to jump in.
Hi, yeah, as I mentioned, outward sending, we're using text, we're using phone calls, we're doing flyers and mail inserts. When residents call in, we do have a customer assistance team, both on our Housing Choice Voucher Program side, that's fielding calls and getting them to the correct person within the agency, even on the public housing side. As far as calls are concerned, we're just doing one-on-one contact calls, and we've got a cadre of team calling to do check-ins, because what we're finding is a lot of residents have not thought to take advantage of filing for unemployment or doing the things necessary to get in some of the benefit programs that have come through the CARES Act.
That makes sense. David, how are you handling with the contact with residents?
Yeah, we're handling it via the telephone or, you know, I mean, there are times that, you know, I think we can use the video conferencing, but by and large, it's been through phone contact.
One interesting question that came in the chat box. It's about actually something that has not been waived. It's the smoke-free public housing. Have you guys seen any increase in or any issues relating to or from the smoke-free public housing rules? David?
I guess I didn't understand the question. You're saying, was there a waiver on the smoke-free?
No. Have you seen any increase in violations or any issues related to smoke-free public housing, especially you know, if the residents stay closer to home? Has there been any problems with smoking in public housing?
No, we have not noticed any increase or any issues with it.
We have not had challenges either, Georgie.
That's great to hear. Excellent. All right, we're a few minutes past top of the hour. I do want to thank both Patricia and David for a lot of great information. It was we appreciate it. We do a few other questions. I'll pass those along to you, and we'll post those on our website along with the recording of this session. I do want to make sure that you have information. We appreciate everyone attending today's session. We had well over 800 people on today's session. I'm Georgie Vanna, our Director of Policy and Program Development. Tess Emery, our Director of Professional Relations, is also available to you, so please feel free to email us if you have any questions, comments, want to share any issues you're having with HUDs or additional waivers you may find necessary. Also, the NAHRO blog is a great source of new information, and along with our advocacy work, being able to make sure that Congress and even the administration know what we need and what we're working for. There's a lot of information there and letters that you can send to your members of Congress right from there. So finally, again, I want to thank LDG Development again for partnering with us on that NAHRO LDG Scholar Program. We're very excited to get our next class of scholars in and make sure see information on our website for our scholarship programs, and it's a very exciting future for our newly graduated residents. So we appreciate all of that. With that, I want to let everyone go. Have a great afternoon, and keep an eye out for additional webinars that NAHRO will be having over the next few weeks. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.